you should have two note sets, one that says the end of the war notes, and another one that says making and unmaking the peace. So we're going to use both of these notes today to talk through the war. So we know that World War I started in 1914. There was 5 culminating events that caused World War I in Europe. We know that as mania, militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and then the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. However, those were the causes of what started the war in Europe. When we look at why the U.S. gets involved, in 1914 they say that they're neutral. Wilson totes that. We are neutral, we are not going to get involved. But by 1917, there's things that have caused the U.S. to change that tone of neutrality, which we remember that device as Lust Ice, Lusitania, unrestricted submarine warfare, Sussex, the telegram, idealism, cultural alliances, and economic ties to the Allies. So all of these things together get us involved by 1917. Congress will declare war. We enter in the war 3 years after the Europeans have been involved. At this time when the U.S. enters, Russia has entered a treaty with Germany that they have left. And this allows Germany to do, instead of a 2-front war, a 1-front war, they take their eastern front and they're going to move it to the western front. The U.S. has not been ready for this war, and so our soldiers are going to be called doughboys. Doughboys because they're not ready. They're young, they're inexperienced. They're quantity, not quality. So at the end of the war, we see that we do have experienced soldiers led by John J. Pershing, called the American Expeditionary Forces. We're going to see the end of World War I. Germany is running out of supplies, and a lot of that stems from the naval blockade in the British Channel and in the Atlantic, and the U.S. Navy is helping. The other thing that is occurring is the Central Powers are all leaving. They are signing separate treaties. Woodrow Wilson gets parts of his 14 points to be sent down by plane into Germany, saying that there will be self-determination, there will be no imperialism, there will be no winners and losers of the war, that there will be a peace organization that would come in and prevent war. Again, the people of Germany read this. Kaiser Wilhelm will abdicate the throne, and a new republic under the Weimar Republic will come in. And it's this republic that signs the armistice, the ceasefire, on the 11th month of the 11th day of the 11th hour in 1918, which we know as Veterans Day. This war did take a toll, not only a physical toll on the amount of people who died and who were wounded, and not only soldiers but civilians, but also economically and politically it's going to have Europe in ruins, that this will eventually lead to World War II. And a lot of this will stem from what will be in the treaty that will lead to World War II. So the next thing is this peace conference. They're going to meet, and we're going to look at Woodrow Wilson's 14 points in a second. But the big four meet, the U.S., Great Britain, France, and Italy. We see the losers are missing. Germany. Many of the Central Powers are missing. Russia is missing. And what we're going to look at is this. Sorry, guys. We're going to look at the making and unmaking of peace. I know yours looks like this, but what we're going to look at is, I have it on a PowerPoint. And so I'm going to use my PowerPoint to teach this. So we see the causes of the war. We talked about this earlier, that the war was caused because of militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and assassination. However, the U.S. reasons was a lot different. We remember the acronym Lust Ice, Lusitania, unrestricted submarine warfare, the telegram, idealism, cultural ties, and economic ties to the Allies. It is these things that bring the U.S. into the war. One of the things, this is a document y'all had. I want to look at Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. He says, open covenants of peace, openly arrived at, after which there shall be no private international understandings of any kind, but diplomacy shall proceed always frankly and in the public view. So anytime we have treaties with nations, it has to be open. And what he's attacking here is a cause of World War I, the alliance system. The next one, absolute freedom and navigations upon the seas, outside territorial waters, alike in peace and war, except that the seas may be closed in whole part by international action for the enforcement of international covenants. So he's looking at one of the causes of the war, which we see was unrestricted submarine warfare, such as the Sussex and the Lusitania. He is looking at, in his 14 points, at all the causes of World War I, and he's trying to prevent them to prevent future war. Number 4, adequate guarantees given and taken to the national armaments will be reduced to the lowest point consistent with domestic safety. He's looking at militarism, which was a cause of the war, saying that let's limit our military and then there will not be no war. Number 5, a free and open-minded and absolutely impartial adjustment of all colonial claims based on the strict observance of the principle in determining that such all questions of sovereignty, the interest of the populations concerned, must have equal weight within the equitable claims of the government whose title to be determined. So he's looking at all these colonial claims, right? And he's saying, whoa, these people should have equitable claims. They should have government. So he's looking at nationalism and idealism. Belgium, the whole world will agree, must be evacuated and restored without any attempt to limit the sovereignty which she enjoys with the common with all other free people, free nations. No other single act will serve as this will serve to restore the confidence amongst the nations in the laws which they themselves have set and determined for the government of their relations with one another. Without the healing act, the whole structure and validity of international law will forever be impaired. So he's looking at Belgium, bringing back Belgium to being their own nation because they got toppled by the Germans. He's bringing up nationalism and this idea that they have sovereignty, so idealism. The peoples of Austria-Hungary, whose place among the nations we wish to see safeguarded and assured, should be accorded the freest opportunity to autonomous development, nationalism, idealism. An independent Polish state should be erected, which should include the territories inhabited indisputably by the Polish populations, which should be asserted free and secured access to the sea, and whose political and economic independence and territorial integrity should be granted by international covenant. Again, nationalism, idealism. He's basically securing rights for these nations. The last one, 14. A general association for the nations must be formed under specific covenants for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. He's talking about nationalism, right? These nations, militarism, that they shouldn't be taken over, and idealism, which will lead to the League of Nations. So here's Wilson's abridged version of the 14 points. No secret treaties. We know that's the alliance system that led us into World War I. Freedom of the seas. We know that the unrestricted submarine warfare, Lusitania, Sussex, brought the United States into World War I. The removal of and lowering tariffs. Reduce arms buildup, which we talked about, militarism, adjustment of colonial claims. All of those imperialistic nations that had taken over places need to give their land up. Let those people rule their own nations. Self-determination, which let them rule their own nations. And the last one is the League. I want you to look at this political cartoon. That's Woodrow Wilson in it. And here is our bull of idealism. And he is blowing bubbles, right? And there's the League of Nations, right? This whole idea of a utopian society that would prevent future wars. And like most bubbles, when people see a bubble, they're going to bust it. And this is what's going to happen to the League of Nations, because Wilson will make a lot of mistakes. So Wilson's mistakes. The first one, Wilson went to Paris to negotiate peace. It infuriated Republicans because he's going to go alone. He's not going to consult them. So I think that's the next one. Wilson further ruffled the Republican feathers when he snubbed the Senate in assembling his peace delegation. So he's like, I'm not going to consult y'all. And the Republicans, he's a Democrat, they control Congress at this time. He really should sit down and negotiate with them. If he buys them in, this treaty will pass. But by snubbing them, this treaty will never pass. The next thing, Wilson will neglect to include a single Republican senator in his official party to Paris. And the last thing is Wilson did not include the new chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Henry Cabot Lodge. So looking at this political cartoon, there's Lodge. He's left here. And basically, Lodge is left on the trip of a lifetime. It is the trip of a lifetime, because if you're on the Foreign Relations Committee and you get to negotiate a treaty with several other nations, this is what you've been working for. And he's left home alone. And we know that he being left alone, he is going to sharpen his swords, sharpen his tools, because he's going to be upset that he did not get to negotiate this treaty. So he's actually going to become the rival of Wilson, because Wilson's mistakes did not take him there. So he gets to Paris, and Great Britain has David Lloyd George, who's there. France has Clemenceau. And this is what each one wants. Great Britain wants revenge. France, they want the Rhineland and the Saarland because they are very rich in coal. Italy wants the Fiume seaport, and Woodrow Wilson, he really wants the League of Nations, and it's these men that are going to negotiate the Treaty of Paris. But there's going to be several problems at the conference. France is not going to get the Rhineland. They're going to get a portion of it, and the Saarland. Italy is going to feel betrayed because they don't even get their port. They give it to Yugoslavia. China's going to be there, and they felt that they should get the German holdings, but Japan got them. Germany feels betrayed because it does not look like Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. They're not even invited to Versailles to negotiate peace. Woodrow Wilson's going to feel betrayed because he's forced to compromise everything of his 14 points to save the League of Nations. So the Treaty of Versailles, Germany, and this little dude right here is Germany. They had to admit the war was their fault, but when we go back to Mania, it was actually Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the assassination of him by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian, that causes the war. It is not Germany's fault. We see Germany had to pay reparations to the Allies. They solely had to pay reparations for the war. Germany lost its colonies. They're divided up. Germany gets to lose its military. Germany lost land to France and formed a new nation, Poland, and the League of Nations. Looking at this, Germany is having everything strangle them. And it's what happens in the Treaty of Versailles that will lead to them openly flouting every one of these terms, which will lead to World War II. So Woodrow Wilson has signed this treaty, but he's going to have problems at home. First off, there's a group of people who have risen up against him called the Irreconcilables, which is Bora right here and Johnson. These Irreconcilables, I always think it starts with an I. They want isolationism. So I look at this political cartoon. I see these two Irreconcilables there, and I see Henry Cabot Lodge. We know Henry Cabot Lodge has been left out of peace negotiations. And so you got to look at these guys' behavior, because here is this Lady Peace, which is supposed to symbolize the Treaty of Versailles. And most of the times when y'all see they're in the background and they're in a train, these gentlemen see a lady walking in, they should probably give up their seat. They do not want to give up their seat. They do not want to sign this treaty. They're totally against it. The Republicans do not want Wilson's treaty to be signed. And Republicans fear if Wilson was successful and gets this, he will be reelected. Liberals, Germans, and Irish Americans, they look at this treaty and they realize that Germany's blamed for a lot of it, and they felt that it was too harsh. The Irish are upset because Britain gets claim to their land. There's going to be a slump in idealism. We're going to see many Americans sacrifice so much in the war that the whole thing of them getting involved in this war was idealism. We had to make the world safe for democracy. But they realized, well, they sacrificed a lot. It's not really safe. And they want to indulge. They're tired of sacrificing. This is going to lead to the mindset of the 1920s where people did indulge. And Americans start to look at getting involved in the League, that would be an entangling alliances with European countries and possibly future wars. So The Senate reacts to Wilson's treaty. And if you look at this little political cartoon, the treaty is tear it apart. And this is Henry Cabot Lodge. He's coming from the operating room, the Senate Committee of Foreign Relations. And Henry Cabot Lodge, he is the guy who has been left. And he does not like the Treaty of Versailles. Specifically, he does not like Article X. Article X takes away Congress's power to make war. And he's going to add 14 reservations to this. And that's why the treaty is torn up and things are added to it. Do you see the little papers on the bottom that are added to it? And Wilson does not like this. So Wilson is enraged when the Senate does not want to submit his treaty. So here's the Senate and here's the House, and he's going to go to the American people. And he's going to take this as a solemn referendum. He's going to refer this law to the people and that the people would pass it. So let's just look at a timeline. So we know an armistice is signed November 11th on the 11th hour, the 11th month, 1918. And we see that it's based on the 14 points. Wilson will go to Paris trying to use the 14 points as the basis of the treaty. Not much of the 14 points will be used. We see only the League, and we see all of the things that Germany has to agree to. Wilson returns home, and on his return, you see this little draft of the League has a little case right here. It says Woodrow Wilson. We see the Republicans have been sharpening their bows and arrows, and they're against this. And again, the ringleader of this was Henry Cabot Lodge because he's been left behind. Wilson gets upset because the Senate does not want to accept his treaty. And he's going to begin his cross-country tour to get support for the League of Nations. Amidst his country tour, he has a stroke. And so by November, the treaty goes before the Senate. And the first treaty they're going to vote with is with reservations. It's Henry Cabot Lodge's treaty. The Democrats will vote against it. And the irreconcilables, who are isolationists, will vote against it. So then the second vote is a treaty without reservations. This is Wilson's original treaty that was made in Paris. The Republicans vote against it, so do the irreconcilables. So we don't get the 2/3 needed to negotiate and get this treaty passed. So they go out for a Christmas break and come back. And they try to vote with the treaty one more time. And it doesn't even get half. So here's a political cartoon. Here's Uncle Sam. Foreign entanglements, meaning the League of Nations. Here's the guy saying, if any man could show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now. And here's the U.S. Senate coming out. And they're really upset about the idea that the U.S. will lose its ability to declare war because of Article 10 in the League of Nations. So Wilson, he's going to say a solemn referendum. He's going to refer to the people. He says if they chose the Democratic candidate, Cox, they want the treaty. If they voted for the Republican candidate, Harding, they did not. And so amidst his stroke and going out there, we will see the Treaty of Versailles was never ratified because it did not get the 2/3 votes in the Senate. We see the Democrats, their nominee will be James Cox and Franklin D. Roosevelt. They're for the League. The Republicans are against the League. They have Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge. You voted for them, you were against it. So what happens is our nation, popular vote goes for Harding. He promises a return to normalcy. People look at that and they're like, yes, we've sacrificed too much. Democratic Cox does not get the election. And so we will never sign the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, I have one more thing to do, and I'm going to do it in another video. It's talking about Booker T. Washington and Webb Du Bois. I didn't get to do this. I forgot to do it, so I'll do it with y'all in a separate video.